This happened roughly 10 years ago, back when Halloween still felt huge. I was out trick-or-treating with two of my closest friends, let's call them Alex and Ben to keep things private. It was our first year getting to roam around without Alex's parents tailing us. They were the type to micromanage every step, which usually sucked the fun right out of the night. So this time, with no adults hovering over us, we were beyond excited. I went as a creepy clown, then dressed up like a scarecrow, and Alex, well, he threw on a white sheet and a pumpkin mask. I think he was going for pumpkin-headed ghost, but honestly, I'm not sure even he knew. We headed out around 5 p.m., which was normal for our town since trick-or-treating lasted until 9. Everything was going great. Just 3 kids messing around, sprinting from door to door, laughing nonstop. But around 7:30, things took a weird turn. Across the street, we started noticing 2 guys who had been near us for a while. No matter how many random turns we made or which houses we stopped at, they always seemed to be somewhere nearby. Once we picked up on it, we tested it. We cut through a couple more streets, basically looping around the block. And sure enough, those 2 made nearly all the same turns. They acted like normal trick-or-treaters, going up to houses, wearing costumes, but something felt off. They were definitely bigger than us, probably high schoolers or older. Against our better judgment, Ben and I went along with Alex's plan. Slip out of the neighborhood and take the shortcut through the woods to shake them off, then cross into the next neighborhood. We only agreed because there was a trail through the woods that everyone in town had used before. We'd never taken it at night, but at least we knew it well enough to figure we wouldn't get lost. So we hurried toward the path and slipped into the trees, hoping those 2 hadn't seen where we went. The deeper we got, the darker it became, to the point we could barely see a few feet ahead. This was years before kids had phones with flashlights, so we had zero way to light the ground. Eventually, we had to stop and regroup. It was getting way too creepy, and honestly, probably dangerous. We stood there trying to decide if turning back would be safer. But while we were standing there, trying to figure out what to do, we suddenly heard footsteps behind us. Slow, heavy crunches on the gravel. When we turned, we could barely make out the silhouettes of 2 figures heading straight toward us. That was all it took. We bolted deeper into the trees. Ben, who started running a split second after us, swore he saw those 2 guys immediately break into a sprint after we did. At that point, panic completely took over. We lost our sense of direction almost instantly, and the woods became a maze. Every time we stopped to catch our breath, we barely get 10, maybe 20 seconds before we heard those running footsteps again, getting closer, and we'd have to take off all over. That's when it fully sank in. Whoever these guys were, they weren't messing around. Nobody chases kids through the woods at night unless they're planning something really, really bad. We stumbled around that forest for what felt like forever, probably 30 minutes or more, before we finally burst out onto some random street. We had no clue where we were, so we picked a direction at random and, by pure luck, ended up in Ben's neighborhood. Without even talking about it, we sprinted straight to his house and locked ourselves inside, spending the rest of the night glued to the windows like our lives depended on it. And because we were dumb kids, we didn't tell any adults. Alex got picked up around 10, and I ended up staying over at Ben's place. But the weirdest part? Somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning, both of us woke up at the exact same time, because we heard what sounded like 2 separate sets of footsteps coming up his driveway. Ben's room was on the first floor, right near the front, so the sound was impossible to miss. By the time we looked out the window, there was nothing there. Maybe it was our imaginations, but both of us hearing it makes me wonder to this day. After that night, nothing else ever happened. Every Halloween after was totally uneventful, but we always had that tiny spike of fear in the back of our minds, like something was watching, waiting, or following just out of sight. I was 15 that year, and I'd finally hit the age where going door to door in a costume just felt embarrassing. So instead of trick-or-treating, I was hanging out in my room with my friend Aiden, both of us bored out of our minds. It was Halloween night. It felt wrong not to be doing something. And since my parents were gone at some work party in the city, the entire house was ours for hours. After sitting around forever with zero ideas, we ended up doing the most predictable thing possible, heading down to the basement to watch a horror movie. We found something halfway decent, hit play, and shut the lights off. The basement always had this naturally creepy vibe, unfinished walls, stacks of boxes, random junk everywhere. Basically, there was just an old couch smack in the middle of the room with a small TV in front of it. That's where my dad usually hung out late at night with a couple beers after everyone else went to sleep. Anyway, we got through the intro of the movie, settling in. That's when we heard it. A thump. Aiden and I froze, then looked at each other. I paused the movie. The whole house went dead quiet. Thinking maybe it came from the TV, I rewound the scene and listened. Nothing. No thump at all. From the basement, everything upstairs sounded muffled, but we were certain the noise came from the floor above us. I got up and Aiden came with me as I stepped to the bottom of the stairs and listened. Then we heard more thumps, softer this time, moving around upstairs. We stared at each other, not saying a word. We both knew what it sounded like. It sounded like someone walking around up there. And then a voice. Aiden! Aiden! Someone was calling his name. Over and over. The voice was deep, unfamiliar, and Aiden's face went pale. Whoever it was, even if Aiden did know them, they were inside my house while my parents were gone. We immediately ran to hide. The only place we could duck into was this tiny utility closet in the corner, the one that held the water heater and pipes. We squeezed inside, barely fitting. Seconds later, we heard the basement door creak open. Through the tiny gaps in the closet door, we had just enough of a view to see what was happening. The lights from upstairs spilled down the staircase, cutting into the darkness of the basement. After a few seconds of dead silence, we heard slow footsteps, and then the man started descending. Every step he took felt painfully slow. When he reached the basement floor, he stopped, scanned the room, then drifted toward the center. The moment his eyes landed on the TV still glowing in the dark, he froze. And then, in that same deep voice, he called out again, Aiden! Hearing him say my friend's name while we were hiding just feet away made my stomach drop. He began poking around behind piles of boxes, even pulling one open and digging through it like he was searching for something important. I knew exactly what was in that box: old family photo albums, random gifts, memories. Watching some stranger rummage through our personal stuff was beyond unsettling. After a few minutes of creeping around, he finally walked back upstairs. His footsteps drifted through the hall above us, moving from room to room. Then everything went silent. We stayed cramped inside that tiny utility closet forever, or at least it felt that way. When I finally worked up the courage to slip out, I grabbed my phone and called the police. But by then, the guy had already disappeared. The basement had been too dark for us to get even a single clear look at him. What terrified us most was obvious. Whoever he was, he knew Aiden's name. He knew Aiden would be at my house that night, and he'd clearly been watching us. Whether he was planning to kidnap Aiden or both of us, I honestly don't want to imagine. It's one of the creepiest things that's ever happened to us. Me and Aiden still talk about it sometimes, but that man never came back, and we never learned who he was. It was the last week of October, right before Halloween, when all of this happened. I was living alone in a small, ordinary suburban house. Nothing fancy, nothing creepy. I've always loved Halloween, but I was never the type to go all out with decorations. A few years back, my sister gave me a tiny wooden ghost cutout, and every year I'd just stick it in the front yard and call it done. That was the extent of my Halloween spirit. One afternoon, my day off, I heard a knock at the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I answered anyway. A man I'd never seen before was standing there. Maybe in his 40s, unshaven, short brown hair, and bundled up in a thick, puffy jacket. He had this big, overly enthusiastic smile on his face as he told me he loved my Halloween decorations. I froze for a second because, what decorations? I literally had one tiny wooden ghost in the yard. Nothing eye-catching, nothing special, just a plain cutout with a painted face. Still, I politely thanked him and he walked off, smiling like we were old friends. It was strange, definitely odd, but not enough to freak me out. I just assumed he was one of those overly friendly neighbors who talks to everyone. But a couple days later, he showed up again. I had just gotten home from work, still in my uniform, when someone knocked. And when I opened it, there he was, the same man, wearing the same smile. Except this time, the interaction felt a whole lot more unsettling. He complimented my tiny ghost again, but now he tried to drag me into some awkward small talk. I kept giving short, uninterested answers, making it obvious I didn't want to chat. The vibes were off, way off, and the longer he stood there, the more uncomfortable I felt. Eventually, I told him I was busy, but he still lingered, still trying to keep the conversation going, until I finally had to just close the door on him. He stayed on my porch for almost 20 seconds, as if deciding whether to knock again, before he finally walked away. By that point, the whole situation was starting to feel seriously creepy. But after a few days passed with no sign of him, I figured maybe that was the end of it. Then Halloween rolled around. Luckily, I'd gotten off work early enough to hand out candy, so I spent the evening bouncing between the couch and the front door. Around 7 p.m., the rush of trick-or-treaters slowed down, with only a few groups coming by every once in a while. When I opened the door to give candy to a group of kids, something across the street caught my eye. The moment I spotted that oversized puffy jacket, my stomach dropped and I knew instantly it was the same man who had shown up at my door twice before. He was standing across the street on the sidewalk, just watching. I couldn't tell if his eyes were on me or on my house because the darkness swallowed most of his face. But something about the way he stood there made my skin crawl. I handed the candy to the kids normally, keeping an eye on him the whole time. I wanted to make sure he wasn't trailing them or doing anything weird. Maybe I was overthinking it, but eventually he walked off in the opposite direction, which let me breathe a little easier. I shut the door and tried to shake the feeling off. By then, the neighborhood had quieted down. Most of the kids had already gone home, and the streets were almost completely empty. I settled into the living room and turned on a horror movie to finish off the night. It was around 10 p.m. when I started it, but somewhere between 11 and midnight, a sudden loud knock hammered against my front door. It startled me so badly, I nearly slipped off the couch. When I slowly walked to the door and peeked out, I froze. It was him again, and he was holding something in his hands. It was way too late at night for this. Everything about it felt wrong. I didn't open the door, but he must have heard me shift because he immediately started talking. "Got something for ya," he called out casually. "Nothing special, just wanted to give it to you for the holiday." Then he knocked again. "Hello, it's just a little gift. You're gonna like it." I didn't say a word. Instead, I quietly dialed 911 while keeping my eyes glued to him through the peephole. He kept knocking, kept insisting I open the door, kept trying to hand me whatever was inside that plain box he was holding, but I never saw what was actually in it. After another minute or so, he finally turned around and walked away, taking that box with him. When the police arrived, I gave them every bit of info I had, but it wasn't enough for them to track him down. And honestly, I swear he was still nearby watching, because after that night, he never showed up again. Almost like he wanted to see what I'd say to the cops. To this day, I have no idea what was inside that box or why he became fixated on me in the first place. But every Halloween, I get this sinking feeling in my chest, wondering if one night he'll come back and pick up right where he left off. This happened about 5 years ago, on Halloween night. At the time, I was lucky to have a house in one of those big neighborhoods, not in terms of size, but just lots of houses packed together. Every Halloween, the streets would flood with kids. So from around 3 to 7, I was basically on candy duty non-stop. Most nights were completely ordinary. Kids would ring the doorbell, say, "Trick or treat," grab some candy, and leave. Nothing ever really stood out. But that night, near the end of trick-or-treating, the doorbell rang again. I opened the door and saw a single girl standing on my porch. She was alone, but I noticed a man standing on the sidewalk, probably her parent, watching her. The girl looked off. She was dressed like a dead bride, wearing a tattered white wedding dress, and her entire face was covered in white face paint. Something about her made her seem older than a typical trick-or-treater. I figure maybe the makeup just made it hard to tell her age. She didn't say a word. She didn't even smile. She just held out a small bag. I dropped a handful of candy in, and without a word, she spun around and walked away quickly. The man followed, walking next to her, talking quietly. I couldn't hear them, but it was clear they knew each other. Weird? Yeah, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I glanced around for any other kids, didn't see anyone, and closed the door. The rest of the night dragged on slowly. A few more kids showed up, but it was mostly quiet. I moved the candy away from the door and stayed up late talking on the phone, tidying up. Honestly, I think I was up until 1 a.m. Finally, I decided to turn off the lights and headed upstairs to shower. About 15 minutes later, I got out and casually checked my phone. That's when I saw an alert from my doorbell camera from just 10 minutes earlier, right after I'd gotten in the shower. Normally, these alerts are nothing, false alarms, but this one made my stomach drop. On the video, for just a brief moment in the corner of the frame, that same girl appeared, the one in the white wedding dress. But she immediately backed away, almost like she realized the camera was there and didn't want to be seen. Heart racing. I quickly got dressed and ran downstairs to check the porch. Everything was silent. No one was there. My heart was pounding. There was no way this was just some random coincidence. And then I heard something behind me. I froze and turned toward the dark hallway. Faint whispers drifted from the far end of the house. 2 voices, soft, back and forth, like someone trying not to be heard. Panic took over. I spun around, yanked the front door open, and bolted out of the house. I didn't stop running until I reached the opposite side of the neighborhood. From there, I called the police, shaking the entire time. Before they even arrived, my phone buzzed again. Another doorbell alert. My stomach dropped. The footage showed the girl and the man sprinting out of my house. They had been inside the whole time. I handed everything over to the police, and they dug into it. Apparently, the two had probably picked the lock on the side door that opened into my garage, which gave them access to the entire house. But even with the video, they couldn't identify them. They never caught them. What made things even stranger was that several neighbors reported odd run-ins with the same pair that night. But my place was the only one they actually broke into. So maybe they had been scoping people out, looking for someone who seemed like an easy target. That's just my guess though. Even now, nothing new has ever come out about them. No updates, no sightings. They simply vanished after that night. A few years back, on Halloween, this happened. I wasn't a little kid anymore, but I wasn't quite a teenager either. The age when some kids start deciding that trick-or-treating is lame. Most of my friends that year had already bailed on Halloween plans. But my best friend Jason and I were still pumped. For me, it wasn't really about the candy. It was the thrill of walking around neighborhoods, soaking in the holiday vibes, goofing off with friends, and doing something a little adventurous. The candy was just the cherry on top. Jason lived in a slightly bigger neighborhood than mine, so I headed over to his place right after school so we could start there. Truth be told, we went for the easiest, most basic costumes we could find. We didn't want to look like we were trying too hard. By around 4 p.m., we were out and about. Everything started off completely normal. We went door to door, grabbed as much candy as we could, and had a blast checking out all the decorations while running around. By 6:30, we'd wandered past our usual area and ended up a few streets further than we'd ever been. Everything looked like any other neighborhood, except at the end of the street. Instead of leading to more houses, a road stretched into the woods. Along that road were these gigantic houses, easily twice the size of the ones we've been visiting, probably even bigger. They looked like hidden mansions, tucked away among the trees. Naturally, we had to check them out. We didn't even finish the houses in the area we'd been exploring. We just went straight for the big ones. Looking back, it was dumb. We didn't notice the sun was sinking, and we had no idea where we were. Heading deeper into this unfamiliar, forested neighborhood was definitely not the safest choice. We finally made it to the first house. It had a long driveway, and the entire mansion had just one porch light on. I rang the doorbell, but there was no answer. After waiting for a minute, we moved on to the next house. Almost immediately, we noticed how eerily quiet it was. Just the sound of crickets in the trees, no other kids, no parents, nothing. Somehow, we still ignored the warning signs and kept going deeper, stopping at every house along the way. But nobody answered. I think we knocked on 8 or 10 houses before we finally noticed an orange glow in the woods, a house with actual Halloween decorations. Outside, it was like the others, old and massive, but this one had lights and yard decorations that matched the vintage style of the house. We assumed they must be giving out candy after all the effort they put into the setup. Excited, we hurried up the driveway to knock on the big wooden door, only to see that it was already open. The inside was dark, and everything looked old-fashioned and outdated. Still, I knocked. For a long 30 seconds, no one responded. Something felt off. I mean, if you had all these decorations and your door was wide open on Halloween, surely someone would be inside, right? Just as we were about to turn away, a man appeared in the narrow opening of the door. He looked to be at least in his 50s, with thinning hair and unnaturally wide eyes. He smiled and said, "Happy Halloween," and mentioned he had candy just inside. There was a tense pause. We expected him to grab the candy bowl and hand it to us, but instead, he stepped aside, almost as if inviting us in. Neither Jason nor I moved. "Come on in," he said, gesturing down a dark hallway. "The bowl's too heavy for an old man like me to carry around." He opened the door wider and motioned toward the hallway again, urging us inside. But instinct screamed at us. Something about the darkness and the emptiness of the house just didn't feel right. Jason tried to come up with an excuse, but he stumbled over his words. I nudged him, silently signaling that we should just get out of there. We didn't stop to look back. We just bolted, not knowing whether that man had any harmful intentions, but not wanting to end up on the news as the kids who willingly went into some stranger's house on Halloween. Our only focus was getting away. So without really thinking, we kept moving down the road. Deeper into this unfamiliar neighborhood. We skipped the next few houses, still trying to process what had just happened, and decided the smartest move was to get out of this area and back to a normal neighborhood. But since we were already so far in, we figured the road would eventually lead somewhere. We walked for about 15 minutes straight, without stopping at a single house. The woods were completely silent, and with the sun fully gone, darkness swallowed everything around us. Nobody else was out there. And then we saw something ahead. There was a car parked along the edge of the forested road. With the lights off, it was so dark that we almost didn't notice it until we were only about 20 feet away. The car looked old, abandoned even, blending perfectly into the shadows. We kept to the opposite side of the road, uneasy but curious. From the front, the windshield was pitch black, revealing nothing. But as we passed, I caught a glimpse through the side window and froze. Sitting in the driver's seat was someone with those same wide, unnerving eyes we'd seen before. I shouted to Jason to run, and we sprinted as fast as we could down the road. Almost immediately, the car's headlights flicked on behind us. We didn't stop. Just a minute later, we reached an intersection leading back into a regular neighborhood. The car didn't follow. Maybe our running made it clear we had seen everything, or maybe we just got lucky. We made it straight back to Jason's house and never spoke about what happened, not even to our friends. That Halloween ended up being the last year we ever went trick-or-treating.